difficulty this morning. I had to call Ernie and get some help. We had a couple more issues again. I don't know why that always happens to me and not him as much as it does me. That's okay. We're glad that we can be here this morning and appreciate your participation today as we go through these classes. We're going to sing just the first verse of number 276, Jesus is all the world to me, and then we'll dismiss to our classes. No, it's not on the screen. Not on the screen. We didn't put any songs up there for today. 276, Jesus is all the world to me. Thank you for mentioning that. Jesus is all the world to me, my life, my joy, my all. He is my strength from day to day. Without him I would fall. When I am sad, to him I go. No other one can cheer me so. When I am sad, he makes me glad. He's my friend. You may go to your classes. I apologize to those who are online this morning that I didn't get it started at the 10 o'clock hour. I was a little bit behind because of the issues that we had with the system. When I called Ernie, of course, it's 3 hours difference there. He was up, so I was going to tease him, but let it go with that. And we thank you for being here this morning. We're studying disciples, and if you don't have the questions, I think there may be some in the back. I'm not sure. I didn't have time to run any off this morning, so just bear along. The questions will be on the screen as soon as I get the remote. Now let's hope that this works. Aha, there we go. And we talked about these things, that how do you define discipleship, and we basically said it's a follower of Jesus, and or of anything. But in our situation, we're talking about following Christ. And how are disciples made? We had talked about that from John chapter 15, verse 1, that one must abide in Christ. In John 15, verse 1, and in verses 4 through 8, we spoke about that. And it says, are disciples made before or after baptism? And explain that, and we recognize that what we are speaking of are those that have truly obeyed the gospel, and that they were multiplied during that time. Then we got to question number 4, which was, are we responsible for making disciples today? And again, we answered that in the affirmative because of Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20, when we talked about the King James and the New King James versions are different in verse 19, where the King James says, go ye therefore and teach all nations, where the New King James, I believe, says, go ye therefore and make disciples. But it is the same word in the Greek. It's just that the King James translators, I believe, were a little bit more accurate. The New King James is just as good. It has the same meaning, but I believe the understanding is better from the King James. And so we had gotten down to the disciples were called by another name, and what was it? We talked about that some 270 times the word disciple is used in the New Testament and one time in the Old Testament. And so we were discussing that, and I think we had gotten past that point and talked about the new name that we would be called were, of course, Christians, and it's used only 3 times in the New Testament. But once this came into being, the idea of disciple, the word there, was not used after that. Around Acts chapter 26, I believe, is where it actually stops, and it changes at that point. But we had gotten down, I believe, to the idea of how does this name affect us today. That's what we're looking at this morning, is to consider this. And so, how does it affect us today? How do we recognize that this new name, both the old, what the followers of Christ were first called as they followed Jesus, but then later on we saw that there was added to the disciples more. But then the name change comes for us, and so how does this name affect us, if at all, as Christians? Now, Bill has been my spokesman all last week, and so it's going to either, like I said last week, it's going to flatline, or we're going to try to help each other to better understand it. What is your concept of how this name affects you in your life? Go ahead.
As a disciple, we have to continue learning. As a Christian, that's how our discipleship is. We continue following, and the way we continue following is to learn what we keep learning, what we need to do as His disciple, and do what we have learned.
I think that does a good summation of what we have there. Both terms have the idea of following, but when we think about what Jesus told us, that we would find ourselves as part of the vine, as followers. In some places, and I think I have the verses a little bit later on in another portion, where we are imitators or followers of Jesus. In other words, we walk in His steps, we look to Him as our guide, and our lives are a reflection of who Jesus is. And with that, we strive to do both. The disciple is certainly a follower, a learner, but I think the idea of when our name was changed from merely just disciples or followers of someone to Christian, it identifies exactly who we are and who we follow. And so there is this effect upon all of us. Now, the next question that comes up is this idea. Let's see. We did that one. We're on number 7. can we call ourselves disciples today? If so, why or why not? Can we call ourselves, can we put out here, let's say, on our sign, disciples of Christ? Can we do that? Is that a scriptural name?
The new name is Christians, I know that.
Do what's that, Greg?
The new name is Christians, we know that was called.
New name is Christian.
But, we are disciples, but we do follow Jesus.
Okay.
Aren't disciples students?
Are disciples what?
Students.
Students, learners, yes, exactly. Kalita, you look like
I
you.
think I think it could be scriptural because we are disciples, but there is also a denomination called Disciples of Christ.
Yes.
Just as if like Church of God is scriptural, but there is a denomination
Okay.
called Church of God. So
Okay.
that's where it would be, even though we are not a denomination, that is what people have come to know us as. And
Okay.
that's where if someone is a member of the church, they identify that name. They would not, if they saw disciples of Christ, they would not, most
Yeah.
likely they wouldn't be coming here.
Well, I think I derailed us a little bit by using that example out there. If someone came up to you and said, "What are you?" "Oh, I'm a disciple of Christ." Could we say that? Or what is what we normally, when someone asks us, when they say, "What faith are you?" What do we say? "I'm a Christian." See, a disciple can be anybody, but the Christian is this one that more identifies who we are. Nearly every verse of the 270 plus verses in the New Testament speaks of the idea of disciple merely as a learner. And we discussed last week, a person can be a learner of a lot of different things and be a disciple of that. And in a sense, a follower. But the true disciple, the true follower, is obedient to what they learn. There's a lot of people who study the Bible, who are disciples of it, but they don't believe what they read. They are not adherents to what is taught. So thus, that idea is not what we want to be seen as. But here's what, remember we talked about Acts 11:26. The disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. It wasn't a term of derision. It wasn't a term to put down those followers. But God had said back in Isaiah that His people would be called by a new name. And so God, through His workings at that time, used that term by the mouths of the people. And so it was a God-given name. And if it is a God-given name, then by all rights and responsibility on our part, that is what we call ourselves. You know, this is something that probably most of us know. When we think of the word Christian, some people define it as the idea of Christ-like. That is a good thought to consider because of who we follow and what we are to emulate and to look at. Here's a thought too. We are also the disciples of Christ because we are learners of His Word, of what He has taught us. And thus we do follow that. So basically, this is where you have the Christian and the disciple, and they're merged together. It's not necessarily synonymous, but it's what we can call ourselves, because the word, synonymous means, well, I can substitute in a writing disciples, unless somewhere in there I clarify who the disciple is. So it is an integral part of being a Christian. As Doug was saying, students, learners. The name Christian identifies to whom we belong, and also that we are and supposed to be Christ-like. It's kind of interesting when you think about the term disciple. Someone in the Mike, was you going to say something? Oh, okay. The individual who, let's say, follows a singing group, and they learn everything about it, and then they get on stage and try to imitate them. There's a lot of people that do that, but they're not that group. They're not that person. And so we have to be sure that we are called by the right name. So I don't believe scripturally, because we are called Christians in 3 places within the New Testament after the building of the church, and we begin to move on, that we are called Christians. Any comments or thoughts here at this point? Okay, I'll keep on talking then. Number 8 is the idea as disciples, as a Christian. And this is where it's going to start to vary just a little bit. Because as I said last week, I don't want us to get the idea that we are to call ourselves disciples, because we are Christians. But here's some things that the disciples were told, and that we as Christians today need also to follow. The first point is to love each other. In John 13, verse 35, Jesus said, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another." See, this was the term that Jesus used prior to God speaking through the voice of people that we were to do. The identifying mark is that we love each other. Now, what's interesting with this thought, and he was talking mostly to the Jews at this point, wasn't he? The Jews were obligated to care for each other, to help each other. In fact, they were commanded to do so. And they did that. Speculation on my part was that something that they truly loved each other, or they did out of respect for what God told them to do? I don't know. But I find it interesting that Jesus would say that you have love for each other. Now, the one thing I did not do, I am not sure of the Greek word for love here in this verse. I would think that it was the word agape. That you have this love of the looking to the well-being of each other. And, you know, our congregation does a marvelous job of caring for each other. The number of texts and calls and emails that we give when someone is sick, and the things that we do to show that love. And so we work at that. Another point is found in Acts 11 and verse 29. Acts 11 and verse 29. We won't get through today. But someone read Acts 11 verse 29.
And the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send believers to the brethren which dwelt in Jerusalem.
How many times, I don't know the whole history of the church here in Cedartown. I know of one instance where we sent money to a congregation to help them. And there's probably others in the past. We've been in congregations where we have done that, where we have also helped a member with something. And that is the disciples, every man according to his ability. You know, you may not be able to give what this person can give, but God says we need to help and take care, to give relief to one another. Then, of course, we are also told to teach others. Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20. We've talked about that. Go and teach. Go and make disciples. And we work and help and do that. John 15 and verse 16 says, "But ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatsoever ye shall ask of the Father in my name, he may give to you." We're to make fruit. We are fruit bearers. We are helping to bring those to Christ. And remember, we said that the idea of discipleship and of being a Christian, see, being a Christian does not contradict anything that was told to the disciples. In other words, it enhances. Because in Ephesians 5, verse 1, Paul is writing to the church at Ephesus, of course, and he says, "Be ye, therefore, followers of God as dear children." Now, what did he mean by that? Well, let me get over there. Ephesians chapter 5. And I want us to go back to the last verse of chapter 4. And if somebody has that, verse 32, if they would read that. Chapter 4, verse 32.
And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you.
Okay, here's the point. Remember, this was all one letter when it was originally written. Verses and chapters weren't there. Paul, writing, finishes a paragraph and says what we're supposed to do. Be kind, tender-hearted, forgiving. And then it says, "Be ye therefore," what's the therefore? Those things that I just said. "Be ye therefore followers or imitators of God as dear children." Today's Father's Day, And we've got a lot of dads out here already that their children have grown. How often have you watched your child or even your grandchildren imitate what you're doing? I can remember my kids putting on my boots, my cowboy boots, and trying to walk around in them and follow them. Melissa, one time we were sanding a board on the back porch where I was. Well, she picks up a board and a piece of sandpaper and she starts sanding. And so our children imitate us. God says, imitate me. How? By being tenderhearted, kind to each other, and forgiving each other. That is what we are to do. We are also, and we're almost, I've got a few minutes, at least that's what my watch says. We're also to grow. We know that Peter tells us over in 1 Peter chapter 3, if someone is turning over there, would read in chapter 3 of 1 Peter and verse 8. No, I'm sorry, 18. Okay. For Christ has also once suffered. Am I in the right spot? 1 Peter. No, 2 Peter. That's the wrong place. 2 Peter 3 and verse 18. But grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be the glory both now and forever. This is what we are to do. This is what we are commanded to follow. Because the apostles had the authority or were given by inspiration those things to say. Of course, 2 Peter chapter 1 and all the virtues that we are to add. Adding diligence, faith, and knowledge, and temperance, patience, and godliness, brotherly love, and to brotherly love, kindness, or charity. So these are the things that we, as followers of Christ, are to put on in our lives. We're not just those who walk in here on Sunday morning and sing some songs, hear a sermon, gather around the table, give of what we have, and then walk out the door. That's not who we are. That's not what we're supposed to be. We are to be the light in the world and striving to get people to say, how do you live your life the way you do with all the trouble you face? And we say it's because I'm a follower of God and I try to walk in His steps. Kalita?
The 5 things that you mentioned that we do when we come here on Sunday is what we do for God specifically. We are worshiping Him. The rest of the week we are doing for God, but we are doing it as a service, teaching others, helping others. Those things are serving God, whereas Sunday morning we are worshiping God.
That's true. We are His servants. People cannot, well, I would say cannot, have an opportunity to see how God has changed the lives of people through His Word, and they too can have that same peace and love and compassion in their lives. And so we work on that. Now, I want to finish that. I have one more question. I just want to get it out of the way. Must disciples of Christ be faithful? Certainly. Revelation 2 and verse 10 says, Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, and you may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death. In other words, your whole life, whether you are going to suffer persecution at the hands of someone or die of natural causes, he says, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. And so we find what we can have there. One of the interesting things is, what does being a disciple of Christ mean in your life? This is just a question for you to think about this week as I get over here. I don't think I have those up here. Yeah. But here's what you need to do. You need to think about this. And does or should what we do, what we are, govern our whole life? And I think the answer to that, we would all agree, is yes. That this is what we are to do. So, with that, we will stop there, and I'm going to run off the questions for starting for Wednesday night, and it will be unbacked. The title is Commitment. So I'll have those ready for you. You can pick those up. And I thank you for listening this morning.